Right, good morning everybody. It's Wednesday, isn't it? We're into the fourth week of lockdown. It's yet another wonderful biking day outside, and unfortunately most of us aren't going to be able to use it. This astonishingly, I think it's the 13th show. I've actually lost count already how many I've done. But anyway, here we are again with Elevenses. You're watching Kevin Williams from Survival Skills Rider Training, and I'm bringing you the live topical news, controversial views, and better biking tips show. So on with today's content. I've got some news in a moment. Later on in the show, though, we've got a quick look at the new Kawasaki 254 cylinder machine. I'll point you at a Jerez video as well, where you can actually have a look at it in action. We'll be looking at why you need to be a little bit careful where you spend your money and just use your brain before pressing the PayPal button. And finally, we're going to finish off with a better biking tip today, talking about the role of the knees on the motorcycle, one of the least well understood components in my opinion. So okay, we'll be running through those as the show goes on. So again, just remember that you can comment on the show. Anything that you say will be taken down in evidence, and I will get around to answering it when I've gone off air in about 30 minutes time. Okay, so all right, what's happening out there in the world? Just scroll down to where I am in my notes. The stories that come through the news continue to amaze at times. Here's the latest one that I've popped into my news feed this morning, actually. Apparently, a couple was stopped in a car by the police, caught driving from England to Pembrokeshire in West Wales. And their explanation for their journey was that they were going to pick up a motorbike that they'd bought. Okay, so the obvious question that was asked was, well, do you have any paperwork for this motorcycle? Well, the answer was to that, no, they hadn't. They hadn't got any paperwork. They didn't even have contact details for the seller. They actually claimed that the bike was being left in a shed somewhere for them to go and collect. Well, not surprisingly, that story didn't exactly go down as credible with the police, particularly when they had a look through the car and they couldn't find any motorcycle riding kit either. Quite how they were intending to ride the bike 220 odd miles back to where they'd come from with no riding kit is a bit of a mystery, but anyway, hey ho. So basically, the police issued them both with fixed penalties, £60 each, and told them to head back the way they had come. So, yeah, of course, most of us have stopped buying bikes. I talked a few days ago about the impact on UK's sales. Down in Australia, a company called Australia Motorcycle Holdings, which operates the biggest chain of bike dealers in the country, has seen its sales fall by 30% since the crisis hit us. On the other hand, there's some good news for blood bikers. If you happen to be a blood biker, the charity that you'll be operating under, the Nationwide Association of Blood Bikes, or NAB for short, announced that they've been battling for 6 years to get blood bikes and blood cars recognised as part of the National Health Service Vehicles scheme, which means that they would be tax exempt, road tax, and they finally succeeded. So what that means is basically is that the vehicles that anybody is using to deliver blood products will no longer need to be paying vehicle excise duty, what we normally call road tax. Now that's great for the charity because it means they're set to save up to about £40,000 a year across the board. They apparently run about 350 vehicles, most of which are motorcycles, by the way. Now, that's really quite important for the blood bike charity for a very obvious reason. Their supply of money has dried up. If you think about it, most of their donations come from turning up at bike events or standing outside supermarkets and rattling their collection tin under your nose. And that's how they get most of their funding. So their income stream, like mine, has dried up. So this is really good news for them because it means they can keep going rather longer. And they've been supported in this as well by BP. BP has already been offering NHS essential workers free petrol, and they've now extended that offer to anybody engaged in delivering blood products. So BP, big hats off to them too. That will last at least till the end of April, and then presumably be reviewed depending on what the situation is at that point. Okay, so the blood bikes and the blood cars are out there not only doing their normal job of delivering blood product, but they're also delivering COVID-19 samples from hospitals to testing labs, that kind of thing. And they're also running PPE equipment as well to where it's needed. Obviously, emergency deliveries of that are being shuffled around from site to site. So huge hats off to the blood bikers. I used to be one myself many years ago. Gave it up when I became a motorcycle instructor and found it a bit difficult to get up and do a 5-hour shift on a blood bike at 3 a.m. and then go into work and try to teach people to ride bikes at the same time. But I know what a tough job it is that people are doing out there, and I also know how valuable it is too. If you happen to be a blood biker and you happen to be listening to the show, drop me a line. If you know a blood biker, get them to drop me a line. I'd love to interview somebody and find out how they're getting on. Talking of interviews, I am going to have a very special guest with a bit of luck on, if we can get the technology to work, on Monday's show. Probably be a pre-recorded interview, but I'll be talking to Paul Varnsbury, who is a well-known figure in the personal protective equipment world, and he'll be answering some questions from me about where the CE standard came from, how it was derived, what it would was intended to achieve, and how the newer lower standards are actually likely to impact on us. So stay tuned on Monday too, as I say, for Paul Varnsbury. Something I forgot to mention on Sunday's show, the second virtual MotoGP was run at Brno on Sunday afternoon. Now, it's a circuit I've never been to, but watching it on TV, it's visually stunning, and it have to say that the graphics on the latest computer game that the GP riders are using do the circuit pretty good justice. Actually, it's pretty good to watch. It's a fun circuit to race around on a MotoGP game. I have got an early version of it, and it's a lot of fun as a circuit. So the virtual GP itself, that may not seem like it, it's actually worth watching, not just for the hilarious "I won't brake until you brake" start, the rush into the first corner. It was carnage. Nobody braked. Everybody waited for everybody else, and it was just like watching a real live Grand Prix, as all the riders obviously waited for the guy next to them to brake. So catch that on the MotoGP channels. You can find them on Facebook and on YouTube. Have a look. Tell me what you think about virtual MotoGP. Okay, so just a reminder, you are watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams of Survival Skills, and still to come on the show, we're going to be looking at the Kawasaki 254 in just a moment. We are going to be looking at ways of spending money and why you need to be a little bit careful. And then finally, last item will be all about our knees and how they impact riding a bike. So stay with us for all those stories. Okay, on to the Kawasaki then. There have been rumours about a new four-cylinder Kawasaki appearing in the range for quite some time, at least since back end of last summer. But its existence was confirmed when the bike was launched just a few days ago, and there's a promotional video which I'll give you a link to at the end of the show too. The bike is in the aggressive ZX10R style, sort of pointy front end, and it is trademark Kawasaki green as well, which if you're a Kawasaki fan is definitely a bonus. It's rumours about the full-on spec are a little bit sketchy. Some talk of it producing 55 horsepower. Now, if that's true, in theory, it should give it a top speed somewhere sort of north of 120 miles per hour. You need about 60 horsepower to get to about 120. So with the aerodynamics, I would expect that was where it should get to. However, the promotional videos shot at Jerez circuit in Spain, or is it Portugal? Hang on a minute, I can't remember now. Sherry, Spain, isn't it? Anyway, Jonathan Ray is on board, and the on-bike shot shows the speedo touching 160 kph, just into the red in fifth gear, and then just under the red line when he snicks up to top just before the end of the straight. So that's about 100 miles per hour. Now, it may have a bit more to come on over rev. It may even have been low geared a little bit just to reach the red line. Who can tell? But if that is the real top speed, 100 miles per hour or thereabouts, it's probably putting out nearer 40 horsepower than 60. Before you sniff at that, it's still 160 brake horsepower a litre, which is still pretty effective. Impressive. Not too shabby. And quite honestly, it wouldn't be too much of a shock if it was around the 40 horsepower mark, because obviously these bikes have to deal with modern emission regulations and noise limits too. So it may well be that it's nearer 40 than a 60 horsepower. I can't see the rev limiter, the lights behind the camera. Sorry, the rev limit on the bike. but you can see the rev warning light flashing. But undoubtedly, riding a bike like this, that 6-speed gearbox will be getting a good workout. Now, here's some good news. Although it's a pretty exotic model, bikes like Honda's NC30 400, which you may remember, which was absolutely lovely little bike. I always lusted after one of those, never actually rode one. But it was really quite a premium price. Well, the ZX 250R isn't, or ZX 25R, I should say, more accurately. If the article that I have seen is to be believed, then the base model price is around about $4,300. Okay, add on a bit because we never get a straight conversion into pounds, but that would still be quite a reasonable price. The Tricker version, there's an up-rated model as well, weighs in at about $4,900 in dollars. So that's pretty decent. That makes the base model actually very similar price to the 250 Ninja Twin. Okay, that's the good news. What's the bad news? Well, the bad news is at the moment there are no plans to release this bike in Europe. It's apparently launched in Indonesia, and it seems to be intended for the sort of Eastern Asian market. So here's a question for you. Who'd actually buy one of these? Would you like a little Revy 250? Drop me a line and see what you think. I will tell you what I think about these things. I'd be tempted. I have to admit, I would be tempted. Now, I fully agree that pocket rockets like this are a seriously acquired taste, not for everyone. For me, I actually like smaller motorcycles. I'm sort of 5'9", so I'm not enormously tall or anything, but I'm not a midget either. But I do like being tucked up on a small bike. I actually like the feel of dominating the bike rather than sitting in a sort of a two-wheel car. I know some people prefer that feeling, so it's fine for you. Doesn't work for me, but then we're all different, and hey ho, it would be a boring world if we didn't like different things. I'm also a fan of the lower power outputs, and anyway, I'll tell you why. Years ago, I got a chance to have a spin on the original 4-cylinder 250, which I think was a ZXR 250, if I remember correctly. Now, a guy turned up having passed his test with this bike, which he bought at the training school I used to work at down in Lydd. So I got a chance to take it out around the local area, including a quick zip around the local Camber Bends. Now, these are pretty notorious set of corners down near Camber Sands in Kent. It's out on the sort of flat area, out sort of general run out towards Rye, and it's a very interesting twisty road. Some of it's concrete surfaced, and it has some very interesting bumps as well, where the concrete slabs have sort of slipped and collapsed. So there are some really quite sharp corners, and there are some interesting, as I say, ripples, undulations. So it really is a bit of a test for a rider and bike. Anyway, the bike actually rode it rather well. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But the interesting bit happened as I rode into the village of Camber, which predictably has a 30 limit. The bike itself had a hideously loud exhaust system, Japanese thing stuck on the side of it. And somewhat to my amusement, it attracted the attention of a couple of coppers who were manning a radar gun in the village. Now, I came into the village sort of pretty much bang on the 30 limit, and I saw a copper in the distance sort of literally jump into the road in front of me, ready to pull me up. He looked over his shoulder at his mate who was on the other side of the road aiming the speed gun at me, and I saw the second copper shake his head rather sadly. The reason for that, of course, was I was on the 30 limit, but it must have sounded like I was doing about 100 miles an hour, because I can't remember what gear I was in, but I do remember that the bike was spinning at about 8,000 RPM, which was about just under halfway to the red line. So they clearly thought they'd hit pay dirt when they heard me coming. But apart from the ear-splitting racket, the other thing that really surprised me, this is particularly having read a lot of bike press on the subject about how you need to slip the clutch mercilessly on bikes like this, was find that it was all nonsense. It really didn't need any more clutch slip than my big single Honda. I had a 650 NX at the time, and you had to slip the clutch on that to 3,000 RPM to get it moving, and the Kawasaki was really no different to that. And the other thing was it was tractable down to surprisingly low rev, something that the Honda certainly wasn't. So yeah, okay, when you did get down to 2,000 RPM and you opened the throttle again, nothing much happened. It was like pulling a piece of elastic. There was just nothing going on much on the end of it. It gradually gathered speed, but that was not the description of that bike I'd read in the bike press. So that was 20 years ago. Technology's moved on. So okay, if it sounds like a GP escapee in a 30 limit, what's the other attractions of these bikes? Well, it's a combination of the low weight, and hopefully they have managed to keep the weight down on this despite the complexity of the four-cylinder engine. And it's the physical small size. What it means is that these bikes are super flickable. You just think where you want them to go and they go there. They really reward well-planned riding and well-planned lines. I had a lot of fun on R3. I was riding that last February, out in, what was it, January, end of January, out in California. I was chasing my brother, and he's got a WR250 sort of trailie bike, and we were riding the twisty canyons up north of Los Angeles. Now, okay, a bigger machine would have charged up the straights between the bends more rapidly. But quite frankly, there weren't that many straights where it made much difference. Most of the bends fed straight into another one. So the only speed that matters is the speed that you can go around a corner. And frankly, it doesn't matter whether you're on a 125, a 300, or a sort of a 1,000cc sports bike. There's not much difference in the speed they can get around a 40-mile-an-hour corner. So on roads like that, it really doesn't matter too much about the engine power. What does matter is the mass, because it's the mass that slows down the rate of roll, and it's the rate of roll that determines how fast you change direction. I'll talk about that a little bit more technically on another show. I can recall a similar ride, but with the tables turned. In this case, I was riding a much bigger machine. I was riding my GSXR 750. Lovely old bike, but it was a bit lardy, and I was chasing a rather talented lady rider on a rather smaller, much less powerful machine. She had about 40 horsepower, I had about 120. I was probably 50 kilos heavier than her as well, probably a bit more if you combine bike and rider weight. She was svelte. I was, let's say, less than. I really struggled to stay up with her. I had to work my socks off, in fact, to stay anywhere near her. And when we stopped at the top to admire where the view would have been if we hadn't been in the cloud, I was knackered. So small bikes actually are a lot easier to ride. But at the same time, you actually have to work harder mentally to get the better out of these bikes. They're a challenge. You can't just shove them in top gear, let the cube sort it out. You really do have to get the gear changes spot on, and you have to understand the engine characteristics and how to work the gearbox to match the engine characteristics. Get the wrong gear and you lose drive, and basically that's it for that stretch of road. It's not just a case of open the throttle and in the wrong gear and just ride the drive out of a big engine. It won't do it. So they're hard work, but they're immensely rewarding when you get it right. Okay, so where are we now? Moving on to the third story, a quickie. Don't forget you're watching Kevin Williams here on Elevenses. My paperbacks are still available to buy. If you can't ride, you can at least read about better biking. So we're going to round off with a bit of skill tips. We'll be talking about how our knees work on a bike. But before that, I'm just going to get on to something that popped up on my Facebook page the other day. Now, I'm not going to name any names, but I will just put this out as a general warning. It was a competition to win a motorcycle with tickets on sale on Facebook. Now, I originally assumed it was a new motorcycle, but when I looked a bit harder, it turned out to be a 10-year-old plus old bike. and the tickets were on sale for a tenner. Now, just kind of something about it that just made me take another look. And the way this works is that you seem to have to answer some quiz questions correctly to get to the point where you can buy a ticket. So it's billed as a competition rather than a lottery. It's not totally random, even though the ticket is drawn at random. Right, quick sip of tea while I lubricate my throat. Now, a couple of things popped up when I looked at the terms and conditions. The first is that the organisers reserve the right to shut the competition down early without declaring a winner. And if that happens, it seems you won't get all your money back. You either get game credits, as they call it, to enter another of these competitions, or if the competition apparently doesn't bring in enough cash to reach their target, presumably the cost of the motorcycle in the first place, then they reserve the right to offer a cash alternative back to the bidder. But it's less 30% for admin fees and an unspecified percentage to cover advertising costs, which the organisers are incurring. So basically, you're not going to get all your money back if the draw doesn't get made. Now, if some of the items that they seem to be advertising are fairly low value, but a motorcycle is a little bit different. There's quite a lot of money involved in that. So, all I say on this is buyer beware. Do you know there is a prize? Do you really know? All we've seen is a photo. That refund policy is unusual, I would say. So just ask yourself, just be a little bit careful. Does that sound like a competition you'd be happy to enter? I won't say any more about that, but just buyer beware. Okay, so we are on to our fourth story. Remember that you can join me here for Elevenses every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday at 11 a.m. British Standard Time. Start again. That's not BST anymore, is it? I need to change that. We're now yes, we are. We're in British summertime. That's where we are. And you can catch up with the show if you've missed it over on my YouTube channel. Which is Survival Skills UK. Make sure you put the UK on the end, or you'll get somebody showing you how hunting knives work. Or you can catch it here on Facebook, of course. Okay, so on to the fourth and final item, our skills tip. Okay, this is about riding a bike. Now, a lot of people think that bike riding can't be simple. We've got to sit on the bike, isn't it? And as long as you're facing the right way and you put arms and feet in the right places, what can go wrong? Well, in fact, actually quite a lot, because how we secure ourselves to the bike has a major impact on the way the bike's handling. Bad posture affects our ability to make the steering inputs into the machine and other control inputs too. It compromises the machine's handling on bumpy or slippery surfaces, and it makes it difficult to control the machine when we're riding in a strong wind as well. It can knock on into inability to use the controls properly. It can impact even on our ability to turn our head and look around us as we ride. So the particular problem is to be found on sports bikes. Now, a little story. Years ago, I got a call from a trainee. Basically what he said was, I'm having trouble with the new bike. It won't go around corners. So I had a bit of a chat about what the problem was, and it turned out that the bike was almost brand new. He'd done really very few miles on it, but what he had done is he'd started altering components on this motorcycle. The bike itself turned out to be a Fireblade. Now, a Fireblade isn't a bike with a reputation of not handling particularly well, but he'd taken advice from his mates because he couldn't get his bike around corners. And the first thing they told him was that the tyres that it comes out with aren't very good, so go and get yourself some decent tyres. So he swapped the tyres over. Still didn't produce the effect he was looking for. So back to his mates, who told him that the next problem area was the rear shock, which apparently wasn't as good as it could have been. So he'd gone out and got race spec rear shock fitted. Nope, still no dice. So he asked for more advice, and the next thing they said was, you need to get the forks revalved. The internals on the standard forks aren't up to scratch. So off the forks went, and they came back with new internals. And guess what? No, still no go. So his mates pointed him at the steering damper. Now, that particular model had an electronic steering damper, and various journalists had a bit of a go at it. So off that went to be replaced by a race spec hydraulic steering damper. And it still wasn't handling. So what else can we do? Well, his mate suggested it must be unsprung weight then. That's the weight that is between the bouncy bit on the bike and the ground. So it's basically wheels, brakes, tyres. And in this case, it was the plastic mudguards. So he'd replaced those with carbon fibre mudguards, which must have saved him a few grams. But it still wasn't working. So he was actually just starting to look at superbike spec carbon fibre wheels to replace the standard ones. Well, at that point, the bill had climbed and climbed and climbed. It would have been thousands of pounds at this point. I did cost it up once and got to about a £7,000 figure. And he began to wonder whether or not it was actually the bike and whether it could be the rider. So at that point, I got the call. We had a chat. I booked him on a course, and a few days later, I met him. Now, we talked again about his problems before we went out, but after a few minutes, we kitted up, we walked out to the bikes, we got on the bikes, and before he actually got out of the cafe car park, I'd diagnosed his problem. Watching him ride away, I could see that all his weight was on the handlebars. Now, most of us understand that we shouldn't lean on the bars because they need to turn. We actually need to get those bars turning in both directions. Once we're leaning hard onto the handlebars because our body is canted forward, our torso is not balanced over our backside anymore like it is on a tourer or a custom, but the mass of our torso is somewhere halfway between our hips and our arms. And so it's incredibly tempting to push down on the handlebars to support our own body weight. Of course, once we do that, we get to a situation where as hard as we push with one hand, the other hand isn't moving because it's supporting our body weight. Those arms need to move in opposite directions for the bike to steer. So if we're leaning onto the handlebars and supporting our weight on them, it makes it very difficult to steer the bike effectively. And that was the problem with this rider. It was his own body weight stopping the bike steering. Since then, I had a course 2 years ago, 2 springs ago, almost exactly the same problem. Top of the range GSXR 1000 with all the trick bits on it, and the bloke was having trouble steering it. And again, it was exactly the same problem. So, all right, how do we stop ourselves leaning on the bar? Well, one solution is, of course, not to ride a sports bike. But some of us like sports bikes. I'm very fond of them. So we have to compensate by changing our riding style. And here's how we do it. We use the knees. The knees can grip against the petrol tank. And once we've got our knees gripped against the petrol tank, we can support our weight through the hips, up through the spine, and that takes the weight off of our arms. Everything basically from the top half of the body, shoulders, down the arm, elbow, wrists, can all stay loose because it is our hips, our knees, which are gripping the tank and giving our hips a firm base to stiffen our spine. Now, I call this the brace position because that's what we're doing. We're bracing ourselves to prevent ourselves leaning on the bars. Now, it's really important for steering, obviously, as I've just explained, but it's also important for braking because, of course, the moment we hit the brakes, our body mass is thrown forward onto the bars. And again, if we lean on those bars, we take away any ability to feel what the front end is doing or change direction while we're braking. So again, we need to lock into the petrol tank and stiffen the hip area, stiffen the spine to keep the top half loose. It allows us to look around as well if we're going. If we're leaning on the handlebars, it's actually surprisingly difficult to turn our head, and that could affect our ability to look through corners. It could affect our ability to take rear observation as well. It also affects our ability to counterweight. That's the skill where we lean in the wrong direction, as it were, for a tight corner. Something else I'll talk about in another show. If our top half of our body is loose, it also means we can absorb bumps. If the bars jar in our hands, then if our arms, shoulders are all loose, that jarring gets absorbed. But if we're leaning hard on the bars, it's fed into our body and it's fed back straight back into the bars. The same with gusts of wind. Our body will get blown around on a windy day. There's nothing much we can do about that. But if we're leaning on the handlebars, we'll feed that back in. Now, it takes a bit of effort physically and mentally to practice this, and more importantly, to actually use it on the road. But it's something you can try at home quite easily. Stick the bike on the centre stand and sit on the bike and see where you're sitting on it. You should be able to reach all the controls, obviously, but you need to get those knees squeezed into the tank. If you can't squeeze the tank because you're sitting too far back on the seat, you actually need to move forward a little bit. If you're so close up to the petrol tank that you can't get your knees together on the tank, then you'll need to shuffle back a little bit. So we do need to be flexible about how we move around on the seat. Okay, so what was I going to say? Just to finish off then, do we need to be in this brace position all the time? No, we don't. Again, one of the things that people tend to forget when they talk about posture is that the posture matters when we're making an input into the machine. That's when it's really vital, when we're changing direction, when we're changing speed, braking or accelerating. When the bike is trundling along at a constant speed, on a reasonably smooth bit of road, then it really doesn't matter. We can get into our comfortable slump, we can lean on the bars, we can take the weight through our elbows, and it really doesn't matter. But the moment we need to deal with wind, with bumps, or with machine inputs, that's when we need this brace position. So go and check yourself out. If you've got the centre stand, put the bike on it and just sit on it and use the pointers I've given you above to work out whether or not you are actually leaning on the bars. If you are leaning on the bars, try the knees against the tank, try bracing your hips and stiffening your back, and feel what a difference it makes. If you haven't got a centre stand, do it with 1 foot on the floor. It will still work, but make sure that your shoulders are flexible, that your elbows are flexible, and that your wrists are loose. If you can't keep those all loose, then there is something wrong with your riding position. Okay. When you get back out there, having practiced this at a standstill, go and try it on a quiet bit of road as well. Find out how gripping the tank makes a difference to your riding. Okay, well, that's it. Amazingly, our time is all but gone once again. I'll be back again. What's today? Wednesday, isn't it? I'll be back Friday with more of the same. Don't forget, of course, that you can check out my regular Better Biking posts here on Facebook. I'm still writing them. There's one up yesterday. But for now, thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll catch you up again next time out. So, yeah, all right. Bye for now then.